just to put the global pattern and Brexit, is that something out of the ordinary, or is there a pattern in that?
Well, if you really look at the world, it was severely disrupted by what happened in the global financial crisis of 2008. And even though that is 8 years in the rearview window, we are still feeling the consequences of that. And Brexit, in many ways, is something that is the biggest manifestation of the trends that have come to dominate this decade. In fact, everything that we believed about the world last decade has now been turned on its head.
Right, and I remember you saying that a kind of recession happens every 7, 8, 9 years. So 8 years, and we're looking for trouble already.
Yeah, that's right. This is an aging cycle. And so therefore, we are on the lookout for as to what can go wrong to trip it. There's no science behind this, but that's what it is. Earlier in the year, it was China, and now, obviously, the risks being thrown up by Brexit. But really, I think the key thing here is to focus on what are the big trends that are defining this decade and what explains why Brexit happened.
So one of the factors that you mentioned, and we've got a graphic on this, is a global revolt. It's like throw the bums out. People want change. And we've seen that approval ratings of leaders, and what you've done beautifully in the book is talk about BC and AC, before the crisis of 2008 and after the crises. So BC approval ratings of top leaders of the major countries around the world were over 50%, and they've just declined to 40%. So is Brexit part of this global revolt?
Yes, I think so, because I think that what's happening here is that we created this index of the 20 of the world's largest countries to see what's happening to approval ratings of leaders. Right. And those have been slipping and in fact are at all-time lows just now, if you look at the average approval ratings. And so in some way what's happening across the world is that there's a huge anti-establishment wave, what we refer to in India as an anti-incumbency wave.
People want change.
People want change, and whoever comes in the way is getting swept out. And there's no pattern. Like in Latin America, for example, you have more business-friendly and market-friendly leaders who are coming to power because the left was in power in Latin America. Whereas in places such as
so it's not just
UK,
a right-wing backlash or a left-wing backlash. Whoever's in, they want out, and they want somebody else.
Yes, that's right.
The other point you mention is, in this post-crisis change, is the world is turning inwards. Countries are looking inwards. The gross domestic product growth rates have fallen from near 3.5% to 2.5%, which is huge, it's very significant. And that is accompanied by a huge decline in trade, global trade, from a growth of 8%, many times multiple of the GDP growth, to nearly 0%. So countries are looking inward. Is that also what England is doing?
Yeah, because that's the new buzzword across the world now, which is deglobalization. We all grew up in the 1980s, 1990s, and the 2000s thinking the world's going to be more integrated. Tariffs came down all over the world. It seemed as if trade was always going to increase between countries. Capital flows were going to increase between countries. Right. But what we're seeing now is exactly the opposite, which is that trade has collapsed. It's now growing at much less than global GDP, which has not happened in a generation. Capital flows have collapsed. And protectionist measures.
Investment money going across from one country to another.
Yes, or
that's
banks lending beyond their borders.
Banks lending beyond their borders.
That's turned much more inward now. And most significantly, protectionist measures have gone up everywhere. So there's this cry for much greater protectionism. Right. And India really has been at the forefront of that as well, in terms of the number of protectionist measures that India has instituted in the AC world. Right. So I think that that's something which we're seeing, that deglobalization is the new buzzword.
And in a way, Brexit is deglobalizing, looking more inwards, not worrying about trade, etc. A third global factor, which kind of explains this pattern in your book, is how income inequality is exploding. Before BC, before the crisis, there were 1,000 billionaires in the world. AC, after the crisis, where actually things have slowed down and you think there'll be fewer billionaires, there are 2,000 billionaires. It's doubled. I mean, that is a huge explosion of income inequality.
Yeah, income inequality has really come to be like another defining term of this decade, because if you look at it, it's been rising steadily since the 1980s, but it's really been turbocharged after the global financial crisis, that as there's been a lot of easy money spread across the world, the people who have really benefited the most from it are the rich. And look at what's really happened in UK as well, that if you look at the voting patterns of UK, the saying that we have is that, show me where is the wealth and I'll show you where is the vote, which is that all the wealthy places in UK, like London, voted to remain. And all the other sort of regions, the poorer the region, the greater was the vote in favor of leaving UK. So I think this is really a revolt also taking place by the middle classes and the poor people who really sort of are saying they're not benefiting from this very
so they are just
mild
saying,
economic
"We're
recovery
not
that's taking
gaining,
place.
Get out of here.
Yeah, they won't change.
So